Thank you. So as you know, we voted out S79, and we're, at my request, taking some follow-up testimony that probably would have been more appropriate before we voted it out, but we made it clear that if after hearing the testimony, we wanted to potentially change things, we would have the liberty, anybody would, to offer a floor amendment. So we're trying to get a handle on how the program worked during the last 6 months, or the CARES funding piece, and why you came to certain conclusions, variables, as I see it without having the bill in front of me right now, include the match rate, the cap on the grant, the issue of accessory apartments. Um, uh, there's something that also came to mind, and we have our lawyer coming in at 10. I'm not sure he fixed what we wanted fixed on the liens. And the last issue that I remember, I looked at the bill last night, and in terms of the kinds of places that are, I guess it was the question of the definition of vacant apartment, and I was wondering whether that in any way opens the door to somebody coming in and saying, I haven't rented my place for 90 days, but it's like a middle class apartment. It's got some code violations, to come in and somehow capture some of the money without perhaps a tighter definition of what has to accompany the fact that it's been vacant for 90 days. I know the intent is you assume that the location is suffering, but I'm not sure that's always the case. So, Sean, I think you may have sent us stuff hot. Maybe I'm confusing issues, but you sent us something hot off the press as to what your program was like over the last 6 or 8 months. Am I dreaming that?
Think it might be a little bit of a dream. I did send a 2-page memo a while back about the sort of the evolving history of this program proposal. I shared, in testimony last week, seems like a lifetime ago already, about some of the challenges and some of the benefits of the program. I have not put anything together in writing since then, though.
But you did share with us, you gave us some numbers, the number of projects that are complete, the number of projects that are still in the works, the number of projects that were ADUs, which got smaller and smaller. The money, and so you talked us through what you knew at the moment, but there's no final report on it yet.
Correct. Yeah, the program's still wrapping up, so there's no final report yet.
Okay. I think it might be helpful before we hear from the witnesses that you've gathered here. I don't know that we could. Do you expect every one of the witnesses to testify?
No, this is a representation of 3 of the homeownership centers, so I figured I'd leave it to them to kind of decide who best to answer what questions might arise from the committee.
Okay. I think it would be, at least for my purposes, it would be good for you to try and touch upon each of the issues I just raised and your reasoning behind it, and then the folks could weigh in with a focus on some of those things. I mean, we certainly want to hear about your experiences, but we're also trying to make a decision maybe as early today if we want to put any amendments on S79. So could you do that, Sean, in like 10 minutes or something?
Sure. Yeah, perhaps even less, because I think it would be helpful to hear the experience from the field, if you will. So Sean Gilpin, Department of Housing and Community Development, and as I said, I'm joined here by representatives from 3 of the homeownership centers with whom we partnered to carry out the rehousing recovery program, which informs the new VHIP proposal. Those are, just for the sake of introductions, Wyndham Windsor Housing Trust, NeighborWorks of Western Vermont, which is Rutland and Bennington County, and Rural Edge, covering the Northeast Kingdom. We also worked with Champlain Housing Trust and Downstreet, which cover the rest of the balance of the state that's not here today. So the when it comes to the vacancy, that 90-day vacancy, that was actually in one of the original VHIP proposals. And the goal there was to, what we absolutely wanted to avoid was an incentive for somebody to have a no cause eviction in order to become eligible for the funds. So we, obviously we didn't want people to get thrown out of their unit in order to call it a vacant unit and then get assistance. So the 90-day amount was a sort of an estimation of about how long it would you would want to make sure that a unit was vacant in order for it to be considered, something that was truly not marketable or not rentable. The idea being that somebody would be loath, if a unit was actually something that could be rented, it would not make financial sense to leave it empty for three plus months in order to get assistance from the program. As far as the accessory dwelling unit issue,
Can I ask a question?
of course.
So why doesn't the substandard qualification sweep in the kinds of vacant units you want to subsidize?
You mean why are we allowing for substandard that's not vacant or addressing
No.
an occupied unit?
I think I'm asking the opposite. Why do
Okay.
you need the vacant issue? Wouldn't the way you describe those vacant units, they're very like the ones you want to fix, they're very likely to be substandard.
Sure. Honestly, I think it is a bit of a holdover from what the program was originally designed to do and has since expanded based on our conversation. So we've held on to that vacant language. I think substandard probably could be the trigger, if you will. That said, personally, I think having the language about vacant in there articulates the priority. And the priority for much of this program is to bring units that otherwise aren't rentable back into rentable use. So I think, as with so many times when we're creating sort of statute programmatic language around or statutory language around programs, sometimes the things that you underscore articulate a priority without being explicit about needing that priority.
So if I hear you correctly, it might be even more appropriate to say substandard housing is eligible with priority to those units that are vacant.
I think that would be, that would fall in the nature of our intention here.
I just think that if you just have vacant there, even though you have the time limit, you might wind up doing some remodeling. I mean, I don't know what the discretion is in these programs. They may not allow it, but someone can come in and say, I meet this criteria, it's vacant, and it's pretty modern rental market rate housing, and now they're going to get a room put on there at a state expense. So I mean, if the goal is to send a signal that we want to focus on those places like in Rutland that were both substandard and vacant, I think maybe we should combine the vacant into the substandard and give that a priority if it's substandard and vacant.
I think that would certainly, as I said, match the intention of the program. We need to not forget that folks who are benefiting, property owners who are benefiting from this grant, are also locking themselves into a rental rate for either 5 to 10 years. So somebody who just wants to throw new granite countertops into a kitchen and is probably not gonna be asking for this opportunity and locking themselves into a lower rental rate than they could otherwise get for that amount of time. So that is kind of the circuit breaker, if you will, for discouraging that type of profiteering.
I got you. Okay. So you're going to go on to accessory units?
Sure. So the accessory unit, again, and as I mentioned last week, one of the major goals of this program was what we call net new units. So we want, whether it's a unit that was in a dilapidated building that's vacant, and we put in some public investment to bring that up to code and make it rentable again, or whether it's a 6-bedroom Victorian that Mr. and Mrs. Smith no longer need that amount of space and want to carve out a new unit in there, but don't have the capital to do so. It's still a new unit. So that was the intention, and that expansion of this program into allowing for accessory dwelling unit creation was the result of some conversations that we had both in this committee and in the House last year. There is generally support for that type of infill development, recognizing that a lot of our particularly historic downtown buildings are built for family sizes, household sizes that we just don't have in the state anymore. I'll leave it to our homeownership center frontline folks to explain their thought processes around when they considered an accessory dwelling unit proposal versus a vacant unit versus non-code compliant. But by and large, there's actually very little, if any, pure ADU construction that was done with the CARES Act funding. There were a couple instances where a multifamily building, took a 4-bedroom unit and turned it into two-bedroom units, and that sort of thing, which is akin to developing an ADU in function, but is not legally the same as carving a new unit inside of what was a single family dwelling. So I think it's just one more option for this program to be used to create new units and new opportunities in areas where we already have development. And again, as I mentioned last week, one of the things we were trying to do with the program parameters of this was to allow for each region to kind of address the needs of their particular area. The needs, obviously, as you know, in Chittenden County, Burlington area are going to be different than Springfield, different than the Kingdom. So there were instances where it certainly makes sense to have a little bit of flexibility amongst the homeownership centers who understand their markets better than we do in, quote unquote Montpelier, even though we're scattered to the winds now. But, to have that flexibility to make some programmatic decisions in the prioritization with always having the affordability covenants and the focus on, assisting people exiting homelessness. But how that's done can be different in different areas.
So just so the other witnesses understand some of the questions here, we're not in any way opposed to these ideas, but I'm just trying to find the sweet spots as to how to make this money go the farthest to as many units as possible, and don't want to see a grant wasted on something that, even though it might produce affordable housing, may not be dilapidated. And so a question I have on the accessory, if I understand the bill correctly, the rehab for an accessory unit has to include some weatherization component. So is that if you're talking about just building a grandmother apartment on a very modern house that's already up to snuff, they would be disqualified in that situation? Or would you say the new unit, if it's attached or standing alone, just you have to have energy efficient appliances and insulation, and that covers that requirement?
I think the increased insulation, energy efficient appliances would likely cover the weatherization components. I think that we also, again, I come back to the 5 to 10 years at HUD fair market rent, and for most areas where if it's a particularly modern home and there's a market. I don't think that there's a huge financial incentive for somebody to take these funds with the 20% match if they already had the cash on hand and lock themselves into that level of affordability for that amount of time, and have to jump through all the hoops that we make them jump through in terms of reporting and the like. and that is where, to a certain extent, I think we do need to have some trust in the home ownership centers that are reviewing these applications. It's not just first come, first serve. They do review each one and see what the need is. And I think that these experts in the field are going to look skeptically at the the modern house that is just looking to carve out a couple bedrooms and a spare bathroom in order to make a new unit. They do, and I'll let them speak to the process. But I mean, there's a not only the application, but a pre-construction inspection. There's during construction inspections, post-construction. I mean, they're not just rubber stamping these applications. They're actually looking at the properties.
So I was, until I turned in my card, I was a practicing lawyer, and I don't know that it says in the bill that they have the discretion to do that, does it? I mean, someone could come along and say, I have a unit I want to put on, and I'm not sure I agree that they'll look at the rent being paid being fair market value under VSHA standards, and for the $30,000 they're going to get, I don't know that they necessarily come to the same conclusion, and it's not worth it if it's just an add-on. So they're adding it on. It's new money to them. It's not replacing what they otherwise could do. I mean, I guess they could rent it to at a higher rent maybe during that period, and it would somehow capture that. But I could see someone coming in. This is the worst case scenario. Someone coming in wants to develop a middle-class housing, put another unit on, is willing to take the 5-year rental subsidy and take the $30,000, and now you've lost one potential grant to a that would maybe substandard that we're trying to target. And I think we should have, this is a program that's going to be ongoing. It's $3 million in base funding every year. I mean, if we're going to give this discretion to these community providers, we should say they have the discretion, lest they come in and say, I've got an application and say, well, we like this one better. It came in 2 weeks later, but so we don't have money for you. That's a dangerous kind of situation to put them in.
Sure, I appreciate the sentiment, and I think being more explicit about the discretion that the homeownership centers have, I don't think is anything that's disagreeable. I would point out that even in the worst case scenario that you just pointed to, the result is still a new unit of housing that's, for the 5-year covenant is housing somebody who's exiting homelessness. So in terms of worst case scenarios, that's not such a bad worst case, but your point's taken.
Okay. So we have, I guess, a couple other issues, the cap and the matching rate.
Certainly. So as noted last week, the cap of 30,000 is slightly higher actually than the average grant amount that was closer to 24,000. If I'm recalling correctly, it was $24,220.20 approximately, based on the latest numbers that I've got. So, and mind you, with the previous program, with the CARES funded program, there was a 10% match. So that means that the average project cost about $26,000 if you take that average grant amount plus the 10% match. So I think that's an indication that we kind of did hit a sweet spot with this $30,000 cap, because on average people were taking out less than that and still adding their own match and coming out under the maximum amount of the grant. Whereas, and again, I'll defer to the frontline folks, but from what I've heard in the weekly meetings that we had during this program being underway, the folks who were hitting the $30,000 maximum were significantly exceeding that 10% match. So there were instances where there's pretty significant projects that needed to be taken on, and the $30,000 was pivotal for that. There were obviously, in order to bring that average amount down, there were a number of projects that were less so, but folks were sort of right sizing and taking the amount of grant that they needed, recognizing their match. the match that's being proposed in this current VHIP proposal is 20%. So there'll be a little bit more skin in the game, so to speak. But still, what we wanted to avoid was a situation where you've got a low to moderate income property owner, your mom and pop property owner, who really needs this cash in order to do, the difference between a patch up repair and actually like the real investment that needs to happen in order to make a building, sustainable in the long term. What we wanted to avoid was a match that was so high that it would only be useful for the people who already had cash on hand anyway, or a way to finance that. I mean, this is trying to focus on, I don't want to use the term missing middle because that's used in other contexts, but this is trying to be focused on those property owners who themselves are not necessarily financially able to make the investment that's needed for whatever reason into the building, and giving them a little bit of a boost, and also assisting, a low and moderate income renter. So that was where the intention came from, and I think that the data is playing out that we kind of found a nice spot that we landed on in terms of these grants, which, again, as noted in previous testimony, I mean, this is a comparatively modest public investment for a new unit to come online compared to what we're currently spending with our traditional perpetually affordable nonprofit developers.
So did the fact that, do you think the fact that this was done during the CARES funding period, and you had $7 million to do it with, and my understanding is that construction trades are busier than hell out there, and they can charge top dollar right now. I mean, as things settle down, we want to build back better. I'm wondering if there. I just, let me put it this way: in this new environment where things are a little calmer and where you don't have to rush to get things built by December 30th, is there a possibility that the money could go further, perhaps with either a higher grant, a higher match, or a lower cap? And are you fearful that if you did changed either of those in this bill, that you wouldn't get full take up of your $3 million?
So I'm certainly not fearful that we won't get full take up. I recognize it should also be noted that the cap is truly a cap. I mean, the bill allows for up to $30,000. So if we find that we need to to change that, we can do that without statutory changes. The department could so choose that we change the program parameters in fiscal year 24 when lumber prices are back down. We could have a $20,000 max, if that is what makes sense. I think it's going to be a while before we see the prices for construction materials come down. So I'd hate to hamstring us now. I also, one of the reasons why we've considered sweat equity to be a portion of the match is because of that issue that you raised, Senator, about construction work being at a premium. We had a number of landlords, and again, I will defer, and we've gone well over my 10 minutes, but I will defer to
Okay. It's
the
good.
homeownership centers that we did have. There were an awful lot of property owners who ended up, who were out of work, frankly, or had hours cut and were putting their time and energy into doing the actual labor on these units as a way to bring them up to speed in the tight time frame. So that is another way that we did adapt to the lack of construction availability.
I'm not sure I saw in the bill that where you had the authority to change the match or the cap.
The match, no, we don't. That's standard, but it is an up to $30,000 grant. So I think implicitly, then we could make it less if we so chose.
But see the wording, if it says up to 30,000, and that's all it says, the cap is 30,000. If it says you can set the cap at up to $30,000, then you'd have the authority to do it lower. I thought I just read that it was.
It just says a grant shall not exceed it. It doesn't.
You don't have the authority to lower it. I don't. Well.
Then I won't try.
Yeah. So. Okay. All right. I think that covers all the issues that I had at this point. So now we'll move on to the witnesses from the local communities. Who wants to lead off? I guess we're going to hear from 3 witnesses. Have you guys decided among yourself who wants to testify? I don't see.
I might. I'll go ahead and put be the substitute teacher who's calling on people. So perhaps if we want to start with the NeighborWorks folks and talk about maybe CJ, if you want to lead off with what your experience with the program has been.
Sure. Thank you, Sean. And thank you to the senators of the committee. Hi, my name is Kenesha Jackson. I actually prepared a little speech. I was compelled to do so just after when I heard that we would get the opportunity to speak to you today. I am the rental rehab coordinator for NeighborWorks of Western Vermont. I am honored and privileged to speak on behalf of the landlords and citizens of Addison, Bennington, and Rutland counties. When I learned that I would be the coordinator for the rental repair program, which is part of the Rehousing Recovery Fund program, I went in naively thinking that the landlords would use the grant funding to repair cosmetic things such as floors or purchase new cabinets or refrigerators. Yes, part of that was true, but to my surprise, I found the issues to be much deeper. Many of the landlords were eager to use the funding for infrastructure needs such as boilers, heaters, new roofs, plumbing. All are code violations. They would say to me, CJ, I am so grateful for this money because for years, these are things that would keep me up at night. I had one landlord tell me that he hadn't slept in years out of fear that he would get a phone call in the middle of the night because one of the boilers had exploded in one of his properties. They simply did not have the money to make such large, necessary purchases. The one thing that they were overwhelmingly happy about was the opportunity to realize lower heating and electric costs, which in turn allowed them to lower rents. The savings from the efficiency would prove to be financially beneficial for all in the long run. The landlords that I serve are great people who care about their communities, hardworking individuals who at times, especially during the pandemic, have fallen hard on their luck and to no fault of their own. It happens to us all because that's life. And when it does, it's important that we have the support needed to help us land on our feet solidly. Now, I want to turn to how the program has benefited the state overall. There were many vacant and blighted units that were deemed inhabitable. And with this funding, they are now adequate and filled with families that were in desperate need of affordable housing. Additionally, with this funding, the state of Vermont has been able to house the hard to house, which are the homeless, which has been done through the partnership and collaboration of the continuum of care. And there are still more families and individuals that need our assistance. Contractors were able to work and earn income to keep food on the table during what would otherwise have been difficult to do because of the pandemic. And landlords can fill their units and continue to earn money. They are truly the backbones of our community. This brings me to my last points. The pandemic hasn't gone away. However, the future appears bright. It is important that we start thinking about matters regarding housing in a more proactive and progressive way. This funding has changed the lives of many. I have seen neighborhoods or blocks with rows of blighted and blighted and abandoned housing and have now experienced transformation because a couple of landlords have been able to repair their properties. I come from a devastated community, so I can speak on this firsthand. I know what distress does to the morale of the people. The people of Vermont are proud and love their families and communities. It warms my heart to hear a young brother and sister landlord duo speak of the property that their late father left them and all the warm memories that it holds. But it pains me when I hear that the place had fallen in such disrepair and that when they inherited, they simply did not have the money to repair it. Or the landlord in Fairhaven who can't find tenants because no one is eager to move to the community because of what he considers widespread neglect. In closing, I think we all owe a duty to the citizens to ensure that we are intentional and thoughtful about planning and future housing initiatives because they are certainly needed. Thank you in advance for your consideration, and I welcome anyone who would be interested in shadowing me to experience the greatness of this program. Thank you.
Thank you.
I missed your name again. That was wonderful, by the way.
Thank you.
What's your name?
It's Kanisha, but you can call me CJ.
CJ. Okay.
Yes.
So
Thank
CJ,
you. Thank you, CJ. That was terrific.
I have a question for you. One of the concerns that I have is to make sure this goes to landlords who really need the money that makes a difference for them to fix up these units. Have you seen in your area landlords who have 10 or 20 units coming in for this kind of money, or is it all people who have 1 or 2 units?
So I am with you. We're on the same page. Majority of the tenants or the landlords that we receive, they're small landlords. They don't have 10 or 20 units. It just, as you mentioned, 2, maybe 4, and that's it.
Okay. Because this goes to Sean as well. I mean, I know some landlords in Burlington that are very, very wealthy, and they're very, very savvy, and some would consider them slumlords. I don't know if that's politically correct to say, but they would know about this program, and if they were doing something to fix it up, they'd say, "Boy, I'll take that 30,000 times 10." And so I don't know if you've seen any evidence on a statewide basis of that.
We haven't, and in part that I think is a testament to the expertise of the homeownership centers of vetting these applications. Had we had more time on this, I definitely would have brought in Champlain Housing Trust and Becca Fowler and Rob Lukes, who are the folks who are on the front lines of CHT's program, and they, I mean, we had conversations. They flagged folks that they knew didn't necessarily need it, and ended up prioritizing, smaller scale landlords who did, or who were trying to do more infill.
Okay.
Well, that's the value of this running through the lens and the discretion, and having the discretion of the homeownership centers applied to the applications.
I agree.
Chair, I've got a question for CJ.
Hi, Senator.
That is, of the properties that you've seen that need rehab, what kind of money is necessary to do the rehab in order to bring the property up to standard, to get a proper heating system? Is that $30,000 limit, for example, the right limit? Is it too high or is it too low?
I think the 30,000 is exactly the amount that we need. Of course, some would say more, but I think that our landlords are resourceful and they're savvy, they're smart. They've been able to use the money and stretch it as far as they can go. But I do think that $30,000 is a sweet spot. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Well,
Thanks,
that
Jim.
does, may I just add to Randy's question, which is, do you have sort of an average notion of the total cost of these units? I mean, I know what our total cost is, the average of 26 when you include the administrative costs, but do you have a notion of the sort of total cost of the whole rehab per unit?
So it depends. So maybe a unit of 2 could maybe go anywhere between 40,000 or 40 to 60,000. So it could vary in that range.
Per unit, or you said for 2?
For 2, for the total cost, but for 1 unit, or per unit, we're looking at about $24,000.
Okay, and that's the total cost of the rehab, not just the total cost of what we have contributed, but that's the total cost of the rehab project?
For per unit, but for the total cost, a property of 2 could range about $40,000 to $60,000.
Yeah, I think CJ, the question is, how do we know how much the landlords are putting in themselves on top of the?
That's my
sure.
question, is what's the total cost? I mean, I know what our total costs have been per project.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry.
The total cost of I think that's what Randy is also trying to get at, is what's the total cost of the rehab per unit?
So about, I'd say maybe $70,000.
That's for 2 units, though.
For 2 units, probably, right, CJ?
Melanie, can you help me out here?
Yeah, no, I actually, I don't have that number in my head. You know, we're still working through a lot of these. So maybe the other homeownership centers have those. I haven't captured that.
Okay.
Go, Paul.
Speak a little to it. I can tell you that roughly we had some landlords that did have some.
Sorry, Paul, just introduce
Oh,
yourself.
I'm sorry. I'm Paul Moderano. I'm with the Winderman Windsor Housing Trust.
Great, go for it.
Okay, yeah. So I can just say that from our perspective in these 2 counties, we had property owners. Some of them did own quite a few properties, more than even that entered the program. But the people that I noticed, we did have one fella up in Windsor, for instance, who added 8 units, and each one of those units, he got a $30,000 grant for each one of them. But he put in, I would say, almost 60,000, almost twice as much he completely gutted the units, insulated, put new windows, energy efficient windows, new heating systems, upgraded all the electric, new energy efficient appliances. And then, so he brought, he's got a couple still working due to supply chain disruptions, but he's got at least 3 now into the system, which all went to homeless individuals. And but and one of the concerns that he had, he was saying that it's he brought up the fact that about the 5-year HUD rates bringing, he was saying it from that perspective. So, from his perspective, the balance was on the border, for him, basically, I think. And because he was saying if it was less money, I don't think he would have brought the units on board because of the extra money that he had to put in to do that. I think that so that's at least 8 units. Other folks I've had that do own quite a few properties. I had a example of another person who came in and basically he just brought his units up to code. He had some electrical violations, smoke alarms. He put hardwired smoke alarms in. It basically spent about some energy efficient appliances. Basically, he got about $4,000 or $5,000 per unit for about 8 of his units. And so over his average was down to probably, I think he ended up probably getting about a $12,000 grant for each one of his units. So but he brought in 13 units. And so in that area, it's vital, Windsor and Brattleboro both have housing issues and some blighted properties. And so I think it did run the gamut, but I noticed that most of the people that had like the property owners that you're kind of concerned about, the ones that brought the units into us anyway, spent, you know, much more. I could say that almost everyone in Springfield, there was another fellow brought in 5. He probably spent about 60 or 70,000 on each unit as well, because these were complete gut jobs. These are people that purchase distressed properties, and that's what they do. And I think that having this injection of funding for them allowed them to bring the units into the market, basically, for this housing population. So
Thanks, Paul. So just to clarify, the chap in Windsor who brought 8 units back online, did you say that his total additional cost from himself was 60, or was it 60? He spent 60,000 per unit.
He spent about, on one of the houses, I still got that, it was about $210,000 that he had to do, because he put new sewage lines in, and the houses had, yeah, so he spent about $210,000 and got 90 from us. So it was
wow. So even so, I mean, I think one of our concerns as we look at the whole housing picture is increasingly how much it costs to bring new units into the housing market, and to bring livable up to code units online for this much per unit is actually pretty, I mean, it's much more cost efficient than bringing on new units. So this is a very smart use of our money, and if you compare what we got, the number of units we got for our $37 million in the bond, almost, all new units compared to the number of units we're getting here, it's kind of, I mean, it's impressive, because we're getting more units at a much lower cost by doing rehabs of vacant, blighted, non-code compliant properties.
And I think while we're on the topic, I'd love to throw it to Patrick and Don at Rural Edge to speak to the kingdom itself, because that's its own its own situation.
Good morning. I'm Patrick Shattuck. I'm the executive director of Rural Edge. We did 31 units, and all of our units actually received the full $30,000 award. What we really saw was there was a generational change in landlords. So units that had been vacant for a long time, elderly owners who no longer had the energy or resources when there was a turnover or an eviction, kept units vacant. And as there was increased code enforcement, St. Johnsbury put a vacant unit registry in place. As those tools were put in, they were motivated to sell, and frequently sold to younger buyers, many who were in the construction trades. So we had applicants who had small mom and pop plumbing trades, masonry trades, electricians, who had the ability to do some of the work themselves and anticipated getting these buildings, and as their cash flow allowed, bringing units back online. These are large units that we saw, 2 and 3 bedroom units in big old properties that had been vacant for extended periods of time. So, you talked about larger landlords. In one case, it was a small, I'd say 2-truck contractor who purchased a 16-unit building from a longtime property owner, but he did it with 100% owner financing, and then was immediately hit with the pandemic, had 4 commercial spaces, 2 which closed immediately. And so his plans to address vacant units just wouldn't have been realized, and his whole financial well-being in his building and his business could have been placed in jeopardy. So I think we need to realize lots of these landlords we saw, they see this as an extension of their business. It's how they generate income for their family and provide a service for their community. And so, we saw well in excess of the 10% match being made, not taking into consideration the many hours of their own labor and company's time that was invested.
Thank you very much. So Sean, I have a question. Is the information on these grants made public?
No, it has not been. At least not the recipients, if that's what you're
So
asking.
would you have any objection to, I mean, we do that with all our $300 million of economic recovery grants. I don't know why it would be any different here.
I guess I'd have to refer to our own general counsel if we can sort of retroactively make public this information, because I don't think that was part of the agreement. But I think going forward, I don't necessarily see any problem with making VHIP grant recipients public.
Right. Okay. I mean, that's in some ways that could be a useful tool to partially filter out people who are doing very well in real estate and don't want it to be known that they took assistance from the state, or there might be some sort of uproar.
But it sounds like Champlain Housing Trust was pretty savvy about their filter. I mean, again, we have the homeownership centers being the filter and being the recipient of all these applications and making the decisions. It sounds like their antenna are pretty well educated.
Well, I don't disagree with that. Ron, I'll be with you in a second. I do think this program could use a little tightening up as well as a little more authority for that discretion. I mean, this is pretty much a new permanent program that we're establishing, and there may be some needs for some guardrails here from what I've heard. Nothing major, but I think still can use some tweaks. And we could either do a floor amendment, or I don't know, if we wait to conference, there may not be issues in contention, so we may have lose our chance. Dawn, did you have something you wanted to say?
Well, I was just going to say, I know, you had addressed concerns about, the credibility of some of the landlords.
Sorry, Dawn, would you just introduce yourself for the record and for the—
Sure, I'm Dawn Cross, and I'm the homeownership director at Rural Edge. But some of the vetting processes we did ahead of time was going to the properties themselves to make sure that they were in fact vacant and in disrepair and had code violations, documenting, an inspection, taking photographs. There was an application process. We called the towns to make sure that they were current on their property taxes. One of their other requirements was that they couldn't be behind on, if they had a mortgage, that they had to be current on their mortgage. So there was quite a bit of background that went into deciding whether somebody was grant worthy or not.
How many grant applications did you receive and how many did you reject?
We received 41, and we only ended up doing 31 units. So there were 17 landlords. In all, we received 20. We rejected 3 for issues with landlords.
You rejected 10 of the applications about, did you say?
3.
3. Oh, 3.
Yeah.
And what was the reason for rejection?
Unpaid property taxes, reputation. Patrick, you can, if you want to add.
Yeah, repeated code and health violations with the town. And in addition, I know we had some where the scope of work was revised because we didn't think it was reasonable. So someone came in and they had an estimate and they had contractor backup for a $15,000 kitchen for a 1-bedroom unit. And we said, well, there are plenty of things in this building that you can spend the money on that, but you don't need a $15,000 kitchen. And we actually gave specs for different cabinets and finishes and referrals to bring that kitchen down so that the money could be invested in the building to make it more sustainable and comfortable for the tenant.
So, Don, in the couple that you rejected for reputation or code violations, what was the reaction from the applicant? And how did you tell him he had a bad reputation and you're not going to honor his application?
Very delicately.
You don't have to answer if you don't want
I
to.
mean, he wasn't surprised. This had been someone who was in the newspaper who'd had a building that had burned down for code violations, who was not complying with multiple communities and brought us applications for yet other buildings that were just completely vacant. So it was clearly overwhelmed, and there were backwater bills as well to municipalities. So it was multiple issues. So he knew he didn't have a valid argument.
Okay. Okay. Anybody else? We're about to go on a bathroom break if you're all done.
I just want to say very quickly, just to add to the vetting processes as well. So one of the things that we did was work with the continuum of care. So we work with the CLCs to really vet the landlords. If they had prior relationships, so we were looking to see, what type of relationships that they've had, or, if they've had any issues with landlords. So that was one of the vetting tools that we used as well. But we also did go around, we took pictures, and we preferred to work with landlords who had vacant units, because again, the need at that time, or maybe even in the future, is to house the homeless. So that's what we were really looking for.
Thanks, CJ.
Mm-hmm.
May I just add, this is Ludi Biddle from NeighborWorks of Western Vermont. I definitely agree with Senator Sorokin, though, that the NeighborWorks organizations need some protection and some way of defending themselves when they turn down the wrong landlords. So, what you're looking at needs to be reasonable and flexible, but it also is going to be a big help to the NeighborWorks organizations when they need to justify a turn down.
Well, I was thinking of something like the community partners shall have discretion in prioritizing grants based upon the following factors, and just have a list of factors that you can work with. That would help you defend it.
Exactly.
It would help you organize your priorities a little bit, but not really tie your hands, because
Exactly. And I think that's very important, because we don't want to be in a position of getting into a legal battle over a grant of this sort. And so having the authority to make a judgment call on a project would be very important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I guess we have our lawyer here with us now. We'll have to think about how to do that best, and maybe just give direct procedures or rulemaking to ACCD to address this topic. And then they would go forward, work with you guys to come up with the magical language that works for everybody. And then that would be somehow incorporated in the contracts you do with these local providers.
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Let's take a 15-minute break to 10 or 14-minute break to 10:15. And then we have a couple of questions for David. And I think we're going to probably end early today. Okay.
And Senator, were you hoping to have the homeownership centers back after the break? Or are we limiting it to David?
They can stay on if they want, but I don't think they need to. And David, you have a 10:30, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so hard stop at 10:30. We can have some discussion, and we'll probably end at least a half hour early today. Okay.
May I just say that if anybody has written testimony like CJ, Patrick, it would be great to get it in writing. If you could get it to Sean and or send it to us, that would be, I'd really appreciate it for the work we're doing with the getting it through the Senate. That would be great. CJ, I think you said you had written testimony. If you
Yes,
could,
we
I do.
prepared one as well, which we'll forward.
thanks. If you could get it to me, that would be great to all of us, but either through Sean or straight to us, that would be great.
Absolutely.